when silence is betrayal. I am Ferris Christine Watkins, a fourth-generation King and a daughter of Spelman College. Thank you. It brings me great pleasure to introduce the speech recitation for the morning. Please welcome Mr. Mateo Chassin, Girard Preparatory. Miss Amaya Walton, Spelman College. Miss Jakai Grooms, Woodward Academy. Mr. Blake Osborne, Clark Atlanta University. Mr. Yashovarman Singh, Atlanta International School. Mr. Jostin Grimes, Morehouse College. Miss Adea Jackson, Marietta High School and Ebenezer Baptist Church. Miss Joanna Jai, Benjamin E. Mays High School. Mr. Max Adelman, Lakeside High School and the Temple. Mr. Ralueke Vandenhout, Walton High School. Miss Maha Faruqi, Brookwood High School. Our litany presentation for the morning is especially important. It was April 4th, 1967, when my Uncle Martin delivered perhaps his most controversial speech, Beyond Vietnam. On that day, at the Riverside Church in New York City, Dr. King spoke out against the Vietnam War. This speech was perhaps the hardest one for him to deliver. Martin Luther King Jr. went against the advice of his own colleagues, and he moved past the disappearing applause from well-wishers. They told him to be silent on the issue of war. Yet, this nonviolent warrior spoke out loud and strong. He meant what he said, and he said just what he meant. Silence is betrayal, he said. My conscience leaves me with no other choice. This was perhaps his most dangerous speech. He spoke truth to power, to the government and the press. On that day, he demonstrated the highest level of love and obedience as a son of God. In fact, it seemed that with this speech, Martin Luther King Jr. bore the cross and marked his own death date. Exactly 1 year later, to the date, he was killed. But there is good news. Though they killed the dreamer, his words are still alive, even in 2017. Oh freedom, oh freedom, oh freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. There comes a time when silence is betrayal.
Make the right choice. Make the right choice. We will be able to transform this pending husband elegy into a creative song of peace. Make the right choice. Make the right choice. Make the right choice.
I come to this magnificent house of worship because my conscience leaves me no other choice. I join you in this meeting because I am in deepest agreement with the aims and work of the organization that has brought us together, clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam. The recent statements of your executive committee are the sentiments of my own heart, and I found myself in full accord when I read its opening lines. A time comes when silence is betrayal. And that time has come for us in relation to Vietnam. The truth of these words is beyond doubt, but the mission to which they call us is a most difficult one. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war. Nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against all the
agony, but we must speak. We must speak with all the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision, but we must speak. And we must rejoice, for surely this is the first time in our nation's history that a significant number of its religious leaders have chosen to move beyond the prophesying of a smooth patriotism to the high grounds of a firm dissent based upon the mandates of conscience and the reading of history.
We must speak. We must speak. We must speak.
As I've called for radical departures from the destruction of Vietnam, many persons have questioned the wisdom of my path. At the heart of their concerns, this query has often loomed large and loud.
Why are you speaking about the war, Dr. King?
Why are you joining the voices of dissent? Peace and civil rights don't mix.
Aren't you on the side of your own people?
They say, they ask. And though I hear them, though I often understand the source of their concern, I am nevertheless greatly saddened. For such questions mean that the inquirers really have not really known me, my commitment, or my calling. Indeed, their questions suggest that they do not know the world in which they live. In light of such tragic misunderstanding, I deem it of signal importance to say clearly, and I trust concisely, that the path from Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, the church in Montgomery, Alabama, where I begin my pastorate, leads clearly to this sanctuary.
There is a very obvious and almost facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle I and others have been waging in America. A few years ago, there was a shining moment in that struggle. It seemed as if there was a real promise of hope for the poor, both black and white, through the poverty program. Then came the buildup in Vietnam, and I watched this program broken and eviscerated as if it were some
idle political plaything
on a society gone mad on war. And I knew that America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in the rehabilitation of its poor, so long as adventures like Vietnam continue to draw men and money and skills like some demonic destructive Section 2. So, I was increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and to attack it as such. Perhaps a more tragic recognition of reality took place when it became clear that the war was doing far more than devastating the hopes of the poor at home. It was sending their sons and their brothers and husbands to fight and to die in extraordinarily high proportions relative to the rest of the population. We were taking the black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to fight in a war for liberties in Southeast Asia that they had yet to find in Southwest Georgia and East Harlem. So, we are repeatedly faced with the cruel irony of watching Negro and white boys on TV screens kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to keep them together in the same schools. So we watched them in brutal solidarity burning the huts of a poor village. But we realized that they would hardly live on the same block in Chicago. I could not be silent.
We could not be silent.
In the face of such cruel manipulation of the poor.
As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they ask, and rightly so,
What about Vietnam?
they ask if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its own problems, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government.
My own government.
For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent.
We cannot be silent.
Now, it should be incandescently clear that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America can ignore the present war. If America's soul becomes totally poisoned, part of the autopsy must read Vietnam.
Vietnam.
It can never be saved so long as it destroys the deepest hopes of men the world over. So, it is that those of us who are yet determined that America will be led down the path of protest and dissent, working for the health of our land.
government from human hands could make these humans any less our brothers. They must see Americans as strange liberators. They watch as we poison their water, as we kill 1 million acres of their crops. They must weep as the bulldozers roar through their areas, preparing to destroy the precious trees. They wander into the hospitals with at least 20 casualties from American firepower for one Viet Cong-inflicted injury. So far, we may have killed 1 million of them, mostly children. They wander into the towns and see thousands of the children homeless, without clothes, running in packs on the streets like animals. They see the children degraded by our soldiers as they beg for food. They see the children selling their sisters, soliciting for their mothers. We have destroyed their two most sacred institutions, the village and the family. We have destroyed their land and their crops. We have supported the enemies of the peasants of Saigon. We have corrupted their women and children and killed their men. Here is the true meaning and value of compassion and nonviolence, when it helps us to see the enemy's point of view, to hear his questions, to know his assessment of ourselves.
Yes, Dr. King.
For from his view, we may indeed see the basic weaknesses of our own condition. And if we are mature, we may learn and grow and profit from the wisdom of the brothers who are called the opposition.
I have tried to give a voice to the voices of Vietnam and to understand the arguments of those who are called enemy. I am as deeply concerned about our own troops there as anything else. For it occurs to me that what we are submitting them to in Vietnam is not simply the brutalizing process that goes on in any war where armies face each other and seek to destroy. We are adding cynicism to the process of death, for they must know, after a short period there, that none of the things that we claim to be fighting for are really involved. Before long, they must know that their government has sent them into a struggle among the Vietnamese. And the more sophisticated surely realize that we are on the side of the wealthy and the secure while we create a hell for the poor. I speak as a child of God and brother to the suffering poor of Vietnam. I speak for those whose land is being laid waste, whose homes are being destroyed, whose culture is being subverted. I speak for the poor of America who are paying the double price of smashed hopes at home and death and corrupt Vietnam. I speak as a citizen of the world as it stands aghast at the path we have taken. I speak as one who loves America. To the leaders of our own nation, the great initiative in this war is ours. The initiative to stop it must be ours.
Must be ours. If we continue, there will be no doubt that we have no honorable intentions in Vietnam. If we do not stop the war against the people of Vietnam, the world will be left with no other alternative than to see this as some horrible, clumsy, and deadly game that we have decided to play. The world now demands a maturity of America that we may not be able to achieve. It demands that we admit that we have been wrong from the beginning of our adventures in Vietnam, that we have been detrimental to the life of the Vietnamese people. The situation is one in which we must be ready to turn sharply from our present ways. In order to atone for our sins and errors in Vietnam, we must bring a halt to this tragic war. The war in Vietnam is but a symptom of a far deeper malady within the American spirit. A sensitive American official overseas said in 1957 that it seemed to him that our nation was on the wrong side of a world revolution. It is with such in mind that the words of the late John F. Kennedy come back to haunt us. He said,
Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable.
Inevitable. Increasingly by choice or by accident. This is the role our nation has taken. The role of those who make peaceful revolution impossible by refusing to give up the privileges and pleasures that come with the immense profits of overseas investments. I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. Shift When machines and computers,
Shift.
profit motives and property rights
Shift.
are considered more important than people, giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered.
Shift. Incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the justice and fairness of many of our past and present policies. On the one hand, we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will be only an initial act. One day we must come to see that the whole Jericho road must be transformed so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. With righteous indignation, it will look across the seas and see individual capitalists investing huge sums of money in Asia, Africa, and South America, only to take the profits out with no concern for the social betterment of the countries, and say, this is not just.
This is not just.
Our alliance with the landed gentry of South America is not just.
This is not just.
The Western arrogance of feeling that it has everything to teach others and nothing to learn from them is not just.
This is not just.
A true revolution of values will lay hands on the world order and say of war, this way of settling differences is not just.
This is not just.
This business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of peoples normally humane, of sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields, physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death.
America, the richest and most powerful